You're listening to the Zipline Logistics Truck Yeah podcast, where we explore all kinds of hot topics in the logistics industry. Get ready to learn, laugh, and get your freight on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Zipline Logistics podcast. My name is Jesse Jewett. Joined with me, as always, our Director of Training and Development, Teddy Lee Knox. Teddy, good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
Wonderful. We got a special guest, one of our most listened to podcasts, our favorite president, Mr. Andrew Lynch. Andrew, how are we doing?
We're doing great. Am I still a special guest? I feel like I'm on, I'm on often enough that I can just be called a regular now.
Yeah, we might be calling recurring guest, or I don't know what. I'm trying to think of like an arc on a TV show or something like that. Like
Your cameo?
Yeah, but he's more than a cameo now. Either way.
He's back.
Yeah, yeah. A special crossover episode on ABC after family shows after. Anyways, we got another hot topic to discuss. Back in the fall of 2023, Andrew came on and discussed Convoy being sold to Flexport / kind of shutting down, I guess, in October. And we just had another domino to fall recently, is that UPS sold Coyote Logistics. That was in June 23rd. They announced to sell Coyote to RXO for $1.025 billion. That's a billion with a B. It's on track to close by the end of 2024, which will turn RXO into the third largest provider of brokered transportation in North America. Coyote, for those of us who have been in the industry for a while, we are very, very familiar with their growth. It's been exciting to watch over, I guess it's like 15 years or so. And to see this is the second time they've been sold. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah. Number 2.
Yeah, so let's just kind of start there. I know they're based in Chicago, but how do you think this is going to impact the freight market?
Yeah, I mean, from everything I've read about the transaction and the synergies and details behind it, which are kind of limited as of today, but the understanding I've got was that there was a surprisingly small amount of customer crossover for them, and that made the deal a bit of a no-brainer for the RXO team. At the end of the day, the freight, similar to what we talked about Convoy and how is that going to impact the freight market, that the numbers sound really splashy, $1 billion or billions of dollars in top line revenue,
right?
Without contextualizing that the freight market itself is close to $1 trillion. It'd be really hard for any one company or one transaction to make a huge market-wide impact. I think that these questions are going to start to get answered when we start to understand how RXO services their client base differently than Coyote, and how RXO goes to market differently than Coyote. So I don't know. I think that's kind of a TBD, but I wouldn't imagine that we're going to see, massive ripples outside of the set of sort of giant-sized mega brokers that seem to share and trade customers between one another.
Right. For those who haven't listened to our market update on Q3, I mean, I like to call it a seasonal market right now. So it's relatively stable, but there are pockets of disruption, right? We're currently, in July of 2024, we're kind of on the tail end, hopefully, of the produce kind of push from tax day through now. We're starting to see, imports into Southern California are up. So there's a little bit of disruption there in Southern California. But for the most part, we're on a 2-year cycle of either compression or relative stability as far as rates are concerned. There are signs, right? Andrew, you would say there's signs of disruption pending?
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now, the unfortunate position of a person trying to read the tea leaves, that it's a lot of feel.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of great, robust data to back up what's going on out there, right? We see the tender rejection ticking up, and certainly see the carrier population starting to shrink a little bit faster. And certainly there are signs that small carrier population that bloomed, enormously during COVID is starting to shrink much faster.
Yeah.
And those will both, those will correlate, right? As that population shrinks, tender rejections will climb faster. That tends to be a kind of a virtuous cycle, depending on which side of the inflation deflation coin you sit on. But other than that, I think that we're starting to see, at least, on sort of the business development front,
Hmm.
we're starting to see some of our larger competitors that are maybe a little bit less specialized and a little bit less equipped to deal with high service, high stability freight.
Yeah.
We're starting to see those service metrics come down, and we're seeing those customer bases a lot more open to true solutions providers.
Speaking of customers, so I guess this is relevant to our recent acquisition, but as far as our producer is concerned, we can cut this out if we don't. But as for Coyote customers, right? They're probably not similar to our customers of our recent acquisition back in April, March. There shouldn't really be any disruption for them, right? It's probably going to be status quo, just maybe it has a new letterhead on top of it.
Yeah, I would think so. Again, it really depends on how RXO, philosophically stands on customer service. I think, generally, if if you're someone who was working with Coyote under the UPS flag, you're probably someone who buys capacity through that mega broker, kind of subset of service providers. And you know, not to denigrate that value set, it's a different one than the one that we operate on.
Sure.
I wouldn't imagine that there's a huge difference between the two. What I think, is interesting about the deal and was a little bit surprising to me that, Coyote, from my seat, from someone who competed with them at a large broker, and then certainly competed against them in their early years pre UPS at Zipline. They had a reputation that went along, looking back at their strategy, which was incredibly aggressive pricing,
Mm-hmm.
backed up by fantastic service. And I think those of us that were on the outside looking in at that organization had a hard time understanding how they were doing this.
Yeah.
And sort of post UPS transaction, we all slowly started to learn that they were actually doing it because they weren't making any money,
Right.
from a bottom line perspective as an organization, which is what made the valuation they got from UPS, so kind of wild. And also, when you look at what the transaction price was from RXO, it's almost $800 million left.
I was going to say, yeah. So for reference, that was, they were sold initially, I forget the time frame, but 7 to 10 years ago for $1.8 billion, bought by UPS, and then sold recently for $1.025 billion. So yeah, quick math, it's gone down by $800 million. So
not a great result. And that I think at the end of the day, sort of goes back to this conversation of a reality check for the entire transportation marketplace, shippers, carriers, from that. When money's not free anymore, which it's not, and it probably won't be again for a very long time.
Right.
You really can't operate a business at low single digit margins on the top line the way that most of us understand Coyote, Convoy, Transfix at all we're doing.
Yeah.
Those days are over, right? And so, if I think about the broader Coyote customer, I think they might have been better served by that company being taken private by someone again.
Yeah.
And getting back to a place where they could have, maybe a little bit more command and control over the service mark, because, RXO, and I have nothing but respect for that organization. I hear nothing but great things. We work with them as a warehouse and have a good experience. But they're a publicly traded company. At the end of the day, service has to come second to shareholder value.
Right.
And what I think will be interesting for Coyote customers as all this starts to play out will be to get an understanding of how much patience there is for thin or zero margin business at the expense of good service for yet another publicly traded parent company.
Absolutely. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. They've gone through, RXO is now on probably fifth or sixth iteration of their company's name. But so they've gone through a number of these types of acquisitions, correct?
Yeah. They've been, pieced together, but by Brad Jacobs,
Right.
who is, arguably one of the greatest of all time with roll-ups and integration. So the last thing I would want to do would be to bet against their ability to effectively integrate, and probably one step back to bet against their ability to evaluate a high quality integration.
Right.
I have to assume, based on the track record of the acquirers, that this is going to go really, really well for RXO. That doesn't mean it's going to go really, really well for all of Coyote's customers. For those folks, they should now, and if they haven't already, evaluated whether or not their value set, the way that they want to buy transportation services, actually align with the partner that they have been with and ostensibly continue to be with.
I often wonder when we see articles like this if shippers and customers are viewing it the same way that we're viewing it. Like when first thing I thought was, are they thinking about the market the way that we're thinking? Or are they just like, oh, cool, another story, and pass by it? Like there's a lot that obviously from what you two just talked about, there's a lot that can be understood and learned through this acquisition about the market, about what's coming next. And what if a shipper has one partner versus various that they're constantly quoting? Like what would this mean to them differently than how we're looking at it, which is the aspect from our customers, their retailers, and the market? Like one-sided view could potentially open up some other avenues for you as a shipper.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're, like I said before, I think we're seeing it obviously on a much smaller scale, but these are, I think from a shipper's perspective, the question is always going to be what's going to happen to me then?
Yeah.
Right. And, hopefully, and I think we've done this really, really well, is that we're going to be delivering on, for Zipline's acquisition, we're delivering on some, additional services that are going to improve the overall experience with our customers that weren't working with us previously. So
our Wally, our CEO, for the listener, he talks about acquisition and our philosophy to it, that it's not something we're interested in approaching unless the customer, the carrier, and the acquisition target, their people, are all going to be better served by the combination. If we can't say that is true about all three of those populations, then we're not interested in doing it.
Right.
One, because pragmatically there's risk, but also because it would water down our stated value proposition. Like we land on the far service end of the spectrum, right? And somebody like Coyote landed on the far price end of the spectrum. I think to your point on the perspective and the questions, RXO has, from what I understand, developed outstanding technology. They've invested a ton of capital into building out a really wonderful tech stack, and I think that also, from what I understand, Coyote's was kind of left to rot a little bit under the UPS flag. So, I think if I'm a Coyote customer that buys on the Coyote value set, and I was happy with Coyote, then I'm probably going to be happier with RXO, right? I'm going to be pleased with new technology and new resources. The issue that stands out for me when I think about the set of people that we serve is that RXO, similar to C.H. Robinson, similar to most of that kind of mega broker population, they talk an awful lot in their quarterly earnings reports about the high percentage of their freight that is moved without a human intervention, right? That 95% of our transactions are fully automated, and that I believe is RXO's statistic. And look, again, that's great for a lot of folks. There are a lot of people that just get it from A to B as cheap as humanly possible, and if that means automating every single step in the capacity qualification and shipping and tracking process, let's go, send it. But for the folks that we serve, there's an awful lot of I think false messaging around that being the equivalent service level to a hand-to-hand, creating better, weaponizing our critical thinking skills and our problem solving skills. It's not about removing the person from the equation. And I just see that as a recipe for really, really challenging performance numbers for folks that supply retail or food distribution or any sort of consumer marketplace.
Nailed it.
I agree, because I think in an intangible service, if you don't have some customer service or some trust there, everything else just becomes difficult. And Canopy does not allow us to lie. It is too transparent. So I think that just backs it. Going to your point, that the technology should enhance. It should facilitate what we're doing. It shouldn't take it over, because, again, that technology can't beg its way into Costco or into Sam's Club when your driver's 30 minutes late. Guess what? You're rescheduled 2 weeks later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I recently met a guy at a warehouse. He works for a warehouse provider, and he was explaining to me that their largest customer is a big national brand, a grocery brand, and they let a big box broker move all the freight. So this guy runs the warehouse, and a big box broker moves all this freight into retail. And the brand is 98% on time and full. Their OTIF numbers are great. And what he was explaining to me was that this big box broker is less than 60% on time to pick up, right? And so the reason that this brand is able to be 98% on time in full is purely because this warehouse has operators and problem solvers that are willing to be flexible and dynamic and work drivers in between other drivers, and accept folks that show up 2 or 3 or 4 hours late and work, a little extra time in order to get the last truck loaded. And, we can apply all the technology and all the data we want to this industry. It's not going to create that. Right? It's simply not going to create flexibility and find, the opportunity to be dynamic and meet performance kind of come what may.
Yeah.
Right? That human beings that understand the business and leverage the technology to their advantage will continue to be able to do.
Boom.
Great.
Andrew, thanks for joining us. Thanks for keeping your cuss words to a minimum on this one.
I was going to say, do you want to throw a couple in right now?
All right. So yeah, very, very interesting topic. I'm sure we're going to see a handful of these, if not more, in towards the end of 2024, certainly into 2025 and beyond. So again, thank you for joining us. For all those listeners out there, please like and subscribe. Leave a 5-star review on where you listen to your podcasts. Teddy?
I hope all of our truckasters actually have a partner where they can go and decipher this stuff from. If not, make sure that you let us know what you want to hear next, so we can actually continue to help and educate.
Absolutely.
Obviously very passionate to me. So keep us posted, leave reviews.
We'll keep us rolling. Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Zipline Logistics podcast. See you next time.